Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Thinking Out Loud. So why am I doing this? Well, I've got this list of 10 plus blog topics that I've been wanting to write about. This is to support the launch of the Wiring the Winning Organization book that I co-authored with Dr. Stephen Spear from the MIT Sloan School of Business. But I must admit, after 3 years of writing and an especially intense 2023 of so many deadlines, I'm actually finding it difficult to start and worse, finish these articles. So I've done the Ideal podcast, which has been utterly fantastic, and it's absolutely something that I plan on continuing in 2024. We've actually recorded some amazing episodes. We have Risto Salasma, the board chair of Nokia. He wrote the amazing book Transforming Nokia, which I've loved for years. Don Iles, who wrote the code for the Apollo lunar landing module. And that is just this amazing story. We have so many more amazing episodes planned. But those take weeks to edit, to get into production-ready shape, and that's actually a heavier lift than writing. So based on a couple of energizing conversations, we want to explore if maybe a shorter form video podcast might be the right vehicle to get some of these ideas out there easier and sooner. So in episode 1, here's what we have planned. I want to walk through this amazing ability, that's something I've just found so exciting, of viewing case studies through the lens of slowification, simplification, and amplification. So these are the 3 mechanisms of performance that we define in the book, saying that these are really only there are only 3 mechanisms, for transformation of how leaders go from, say, worst to first. So I'll go through those definitions, and I want to show you this amazing thing that I've been doing to actually view case studies through the lens of slowify, simplify, and amplify. And this has just been blowing me away. I'll show you the prompts I've used, and I'll go through the amazing results. And then in episode 2, I want to show you another kind of exciting thing that I've wanted to do for months, but only did it last night. There's another metaphor that we use in the book about moving a couch being a metaphor for joint cognition and problem solving. And there are some amazing things that LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude can do in terms of kind of proving that this is just a great metaphor for coupling and cohesion, and that we can view some very famous case studies through that lens. And I think it reveals some pretty amazing insights. And then episode 3, I'll actually show you how we did this and how I used retrieval augmented generation to automate the process of generating these case studies. And again, I'll show you the prompts. I published the prompts in a repo, etc. So let's go ahead and start by defining these 3 mechanisms of performance. So let me show the PowerPoint presentation. So essentially what we're saying in the book is that whenever you see a transformation, there's really only 3 mechanisms that work. And so in this quest, why did we write Wiring the Winning Organization? The quest that Steve and I have been on is to find out what is in common between things like Agile, DevOps, the Toyota production system, which has been his area of study for his career, extending that to engine design, Pratt and Whitney, to lean and safety culture and so forth. And the answer is that we came up with is that these are all incomplete expressions of a far greater whole. And when you take a look at all of the mechanisms, or frameworks, whether it's dynamic manufacturing, Conway's Law, team topologies, the Western organizational topology model, technical debt and payback, those are all can be expressed through these 3 very simple mechanisms of performance. And so just a step back, what we're saying is it's really kind of 2 places where we can solve problems. One is in the danger zone, where things are highly complex, highly intertwined, high stakes, highly consequential, hard to control, no ability to undo, which means you have no ability to learn, right? Because learning is an experimental iterative process, right? That is actually the worst place to solve problems. Really what you want to do is create the conditions so that people can do their work easily and well, where the pace is slower, iterations are possible, the problems are more obvious, it's safer, lower stakes, you can undo and learn. And what we're saying is that there's only 3 ways to get from the danger zone to the winning zone. Slowification, it's where we solve problems not in those dangerous, highly consequential environments where you can't undo, but you have to do them not in production, but in planning and preparation. And so this is really a way to say we have to slow down to speed up. And in fact, it's interesting that slowification itself is a word we made up because there's no word in English that captures this notion that we have to slow down to speed up. Slow is fast, fast is slow. You got to stop sawing to sharpen the saw. A lot of adages, but no words. So we felt it was important enough where we had to make one up, slowify. So the second technique is simplification. You have to take large problems that are highly intertwined and turn them into smaller ones. And so you partition problems either spatially or temporally. And so the end result is you have small problems that are coherent that can be worked on independently. We liberate freedom of action. We can ideally want to reduce coupling to enable this. So modularization is one. Linearization is another one. So just what modularization does for parallel processes, linearization does for sequential processes. And incidentally, incrementalizing problems, that's like agile incremental development. That's another way to divide up problems. So instead of working on it all at once, we divide them into a sequence of smaller bytes. And then amplification. We want to reduce noise in the system so that we can detect even weak signals of failure, so we can decisively act upon them, so that we can better prevent, detect, and correct. So, just to really make this concrete, in DevOps, slowification would be like pausing to pay down technical debt. It's like rehearsing disaster recovery so that when consequential things happen, we're not learning all the tough lessons in production. Instead, we're doing it in planning and performance. So that's one of the best examples of this is by Netflix Chaos Monkey. The fact that they survived the first massive AWS East outage, while almost every other organization that relied on Amazon went down. Simplification, I had mentioned incrementalization is probably recognizable by agile incremental delivery. Modularization, that's like service-oriented architectures and APIs. Linearization, that's like automating a sequence of tasks. CI/CD is a fantastic example of this. Amplification, we see this all the time. This is where we want to create fast and frequent feedback in all aspects of our work. Blameless postmortems, that's another way to learn from mistakes so that we can better prevent, detect, and correct. And we want to elevate these weak signals of failure and create a culture where everyone's seeing and solving problems as a part of the daily work. And so much of resilience engineering, safety culture is all about creating great ways for signals to spread, to go to where they need to go. In fact, Dr. Warren Westram's paper that said information flow is one of the top predictors of safety and organizational performance. So now that we've defined slowification, simplification, and amplification, let me show you what has been so astonishing to me. Here's a markdown rendering of this prompt that I started using in first Claude and later ChatGPT. And the goal was to be able to give it case studies and be able to extract examples of those three mechanisms. And let's just say that I was blown away by how good it was by case studies, both in Wiring the Winning Organization and the DevOps Handbook, where I could give it the case study, and then with this prompt, it would actually generate examples of these mechanisms at work. In fact, let me show you that first. Yeah, so the first one that I did was Nordstrom. So there are two Nordstrom case studies in the DevOps Handbook, and so I extracted that out and put that into Claude 2 initially, just because it had a larger context window, and now that I was actually able to do that in ChatGPT, now with the larger context windows. So I actually put a bunch of these blog posts out kind of before the book launch, and so here's an abbreviated version of the case study that shows up in the DevOps Handbook, describing how Courtney Kistler, then VP of e-commerce and store technologies at Nordstrom, took advantage of the fact that in 2011 the board studied the plight of Blockbuster, Borders, Barnes & Nobles, and they call it the killer bees, right? These are all prominent retailers that that went out of business. And so their goal was like, what do we need to do to avert that fate? And so, there are a lot of interesting parts of the story, but I wanted to see if we could extract out what were the key mechanisms at work, and why would I want to do that? I love the principle of parsimony, where you attempt to explain the most with the least. They say the goal of science is to explain the most amount of observable phenomena with the fewest number of principles, confirm deeply held intuition, and reveal surprising insights. And I found that by extracting examples through the lens of slowify, simplify, and amplify, it does absolutely that. So let's see what it came up with. So this is slightly edited, but slowification. Nordstrom shifted from a fast-paced, cost-optimized approach to one focusing on speed and agility. So yeah, the exact quote was, instead of optimizing for cost, they decided to optimize for speed. And so this was triggered by studying how traditional retail models were failing companies. So that's fantastic. They focused on specific areas of the business to experiment and learn rather than causing upheavals in the whole system. I love that. And so this allowed for more deliberate planning and practice. In other words, they created a model line, a small but coherent unit which they can safely experiment and change. And so the specific examples of that were their mobile app and the in-store systems to support their restaurants. So again, just fantastic. These are slowification, where we do our kind of tough thinking, not in the middle of a production outage, not in the middle of a highly intertwined complex system where the consequences are high if we screw up. Instead, they found small areas of business to focus on. So simplification. They simplified their approach by focusing on specific areas of business for initial transformations efforts. So they were coherent. In other words, the restaurant systems, the boundaries of the system were well known. The stakes of things going wrong were lower, and they did the same thing with the mobile application, peeling out that value stream for the people working on the mobile app, and they could do their work without jeopardizing the rest of their, say, e-commerce systems and so forth. And they moved from an annual planning cycle to a continuous planning process, simplifying the prioritization of work based on customer needs. This is interesting. I didn't actually see this fully internalize this. Yeah, so they went from one of the metaphors we use in the book is the moving and painting silos. And it just shows that even in simple, slow-moving systems like moving and painting to renovate a hotel, that even there scheduling fails because it can't keep up with the actual production environment. And here, this is an example of the annual planning cycle is just not sufficient when you have a dynamic, changing environment where you have to change priorities, things go wrong, things take longer than expected, there's more signals from the customer, etc. And then amplification. Nordstrom amplified the issues around mobile application. By acknowledging negative reviews, so they acted more quickly, faster releases, quicker responses to customer feedback. Yep, absolutely. The goal is to an amplification to generate a signal, transmit it, get it to where it needs to go to the receiver, act upon it, and confirm that it actually worked. And sort of like the OODA loop, you want those cycles to be shorter and those signals to be more intense. And here's another example. For the in-store cafe bistro restaurants, they had a much faster cadence of experimentation. I love it. So that was super awesome. And in episode 3, I'll share with you how we did that, because we got to the point using Chat Thing. It's a tool that makes it really easy to upload documents and prompt it like, hey, go retrieve this case study and do this analysis. So it was also cool to be able to feed it other documents. In fact, one of the things that I did after that was there was a phenomenal post-incident review after the 60-hour Cloudflare outage by their CEO, Matthew Prince. I mean, it was just fantastic. In fact, I was so inspired by it. I read the whole thing. I think I feel like it's 24,000 words. I mean, it is a phenomenal chronology of the timeline. Now, it's an amazing read. And like all outages, especially at plant scale networks, it involves complex distributed systems, tons of things going wrong, amazing descriptions of the technical heroics to actually get their system back online. And so, if you like stories that involve the entire Kafka cluster going down, manual restarts of configuration management servers, server rebuilds, having to reboot thousands of servers, right? If you like stories like that, you will love reading the Cloudflare post-incident review. But what's really cool about it is that they actually did some analysis, and they talked about, one, sort of discussing how they are committed to make sure that doesn't happen again, and a program they talked about called Code Orange, sort of a slowification mechanism to figure out what does it take to make the services more resilient. On this 40-hour outage. And so incidentally, it started with a power failure in a co-located facility, and it revealed a whole bunch of latent defects, latent unknown dependencies on single points of failure, which included their analytics and logging platforms. So anyway, I wanted to really distill the key insights from it. I mean, it's great to read a story, but how do we better extract the lessons? And I thought it would be amazing to view it through the lens of Slowify, Simplify, and Amplify. So here's what it came up with. Slowification. Lack of rigorous disaster recovery testing at data center scales led to undetected dependencies when a colo data center went down. And so this is really the opposite of what we want, which is things like Netflix Chaos Monkey, where they were constantly injecting faults into the production environment, right? Shutting down entire VMs in production so that we could get constant feedback to see if we are as resilient as we think we are. That's kind of the opposite side of the spectrum. In other words, problems were discovered in the performance domain instead of the more forgiving domains of planning and practice, right? Exactly, right? So ideally you want to find these out during planning and practice or under controlled conditions like Chaos Monkey, where it randomly shut down VMs during the normal office hours when developers and engineers are already in the office or working. I love this one. Mid-crisis decisions to delay restart procedures during the outage led to the thundering herd problem. Okay, so there's a key moment he talks about where after 40 plus hours of firefighting and this emergency behavior, decide to delay the restarts to the next morning. And so they restart them all at the same time. and what this led to was what they call the thundering herd. So basically, as every server restarts, they start hammering on their dependent systems, like it could be databases, anything that's shared, and then they fall over, and then they fail too. And so this caused even more problems just when things were stable. So really the slowification thing here is that they made a mid-crisis decision, right? Instead of having planned these in advance, right? So they could, in a slower, more deliberative way, say, we should have actually staggered the restarts. We don't want them to happen all at once. This is not to say would have, could have, should have. We're just saying that so these in-the-middle audible game calls, right? It's often very important to do, but sometimes they're not the right time where you can actually do a lot of scenario planning to see if that's the right thing. Simplification. Love these. Tight coupling between services across data centers causing cascading failures. Right. So, so the fact that many services were not highly available, that they depended on single point of failures. That's an example of tight coupling. The fact that the thundering herd happened at all, right? That's another example of a degree of coupling that they probably weren't aware of. Centralized servers lack modularity to operate independently. Okay, yep, that's absolutely right. Kind of in the ideal, you might want to have like things like service-oriented architectures, domain-driven design, where no data stores are shared between them, right? Which is often a point of unintended, undesired coupling. And then unknown dependencies and manual configuration management slow down recovery. Yeah, so these are all sort of places where the system could have been more modular. Amplification. Lack of monitoring and alerts around data center power failure. So this is not a data center that they managed, and they didn't have any visibility into things going wrong there. And I think that I think the implication is that could have deflected some of these outcomes, or it could have introduced more points where they could have acted differently to deflect those bad outcomes. No alarms triggered for dependent servers failing. Formal escalation processes were not in place to activate incident response. Oh, love this one. Many services that customers depend upon were not required to integrate with their high availability clusters, which meant that redundancy protections worked inconsistently, and the corrective actions weren't generated. So this is interesting. So if I read this correctly, what this indicates is that Cloudflare is shipping tons of services, not just a CDN. They were getting many, many more services in production, and what happened is that many of these services were never certified that they were highly available. So I'm using my words, not theirs, but the notion that says yes, we actually tested this to make sure that this new service could survive failures of these dependent services. And so he actually talks about in this kind of rush to market, it was put on the to-do list but never completed. And so here's an example of a failure of here's a signal that wasn't sufficiently amplified until something disruptive happened, the 40-hour outage. So again, I love this because it shows how LLMs, if you prompt it correctly, can extract an analysis in a very simple lens, right? So I love the phrase, anyone can make something simple be complex, but it's something else to take something complex and make it simple. And so I feel it does this. So I'm going to share one more, just as we're talking about generative AI. I was dazzled by the leaked memo from Google from an AI researcher that was titled, "We have no moat and neither does OpenAI." I'll show it to you here. And it's this amazing article that's published by Semi-Analysis, which is a phenomenal analyst firm, this group of researchers, practitioners. I was introduced to them by the Latent Space podcast and Swix. And by the way, Swix is actually speaking at the at GeneCon next week. Anyway, I'm just so excited about what our community can learn from him. But this amazing memo is really this call to action that says, we at Google aren't positioned to win the arms race in AI, and neither is OpenAI. And basically, he describes this explosion of innovation that's happening in the open source community, pointing to the release of Meta, Facebook releasing Llama, and all the innovation that's happening. They've shrunk it so that you can run it on mobile devices. They're being able to make modifications that don't involve these $100 million training runs. And it's just this amazing article that describes what's being done in the open source community and saying that they might be making the wrong bets, right? In fact, that's what they say. We have no secret sauce. People will not pay for a restricted model when free. Giant models are slowing us down. And this reminded me of modularity. Let me just go to the article. Yeah, so what was exciting to me about this was, well, first off, I don't claim to be an expert on AI because I'm not. I have no basis to really have an opinion on this, but there was something familiar about this memo. And in the Wiring the Winning Organization book, we talk about the Amazon $1 billion API re-architecture in 2001. This is actually eerily similar to the $5 billion investment that IBM made in the 1960s to create the IBM 360 project. So that's $20 billion in today's dollars. And they're all about creating an architecture that allows teams to work in parallel, to be able to innovate and work independently of each other. And that's really, I think, the gist of what he's talking about is that there's this tremendous outpouring of innovation. Look at this amazing timeline at the bottom of this article of what happened in the 6 weeks after Llama is launched. The model is leaked. The weights are leaked. They get running on a toaster, on a laptop. It's faster. They achieve parity with Bard. Blah 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 blah. So that was eerily familiar to me, and so I wanted to see what the three mechanisms would say about this. And because here's what I know: faster iteration is better than slower iteration. Having more iterations happening in parallel is better than having fewer iterations happening in parallel, and more brains working on a problem is better than fewer brains working on a problem. I would say those are kind of the laws of, these are principles that is very difficult to argue against. So what does GPT-4 say about the memo through the lens of slowify, simplify, and amplify? Slowification. The memo proposed a reassessment of Google's approach to AI development by proposing a thoughtful and strategic response to the changing landscape, especially around open source. Great. The memo suggested there is much to learn about the open source community, pointing out the incredible pace of innovation and the stunning timeline of advancements in the 50 days after the leak of Llama. Amazing. It's like, I edited this, I did edit this, but how amazing is that? It's really pulling out these salient aspects. The memo describes the shortcomings of direct competition with open source and proposes a strategic pivot to create an ecosystem of which open source operates within. Yeah, that's cool. Simplification. An example of incrementalization is the ability for smaller models to run on consumer hardware. Enables smaller incremental steps than are currently possible with these frontier LLMs. Awesome. So iterate faster. is better. Modularization. The pace of innovations happening in open source is astonishingly fast. The whole creation of low-rank adaptation, LoRa, is just one mechanism that allows quicker update of models without this kind of long, say 40-day training run or pre-training run. Smaller models working together, complementary efforts allow for separate enhancements and sharing of model components, enabling parallel development efforts. In other words, more brains beat fewer brains almost all the time. And another way to say this is that the imagine the frontier that you can explore is much vaster when you have hundreds of people working on the different niches of the problem versus one. And open source offers a decentralized model of innovation where the collective intelligence can contribute to the evolution of AI models. Awesome. Amplification. The memo itself is an example of an attempt to amplify a signal that Google might be at a competitive disadvantage compared to open source models, signaling urgent need for action and attention. Love it. Amplify. The memo itself is an example of amplification. It proposes the need to adapt a strategy and pushes the organization to consider and act upon the challenges more promptly and effectively before it is too late. Oh, love that. Right? The idea of amplification is you want to amplify the signals, right, and solve them sooner when it's less effort and you can deflect those bad outcomes. So maybe in another episode I'll talk about like why I think kind of the frontier LLMs, why they might not be able to take advantage of modularity, right? The fact that they are these highly integrated systems that take $100 million of compute to train, right? Maybe that might be a fact of life, and the fact that GPT-4 performance hasn't been matched by other people might be evidence that there is a place for these very foundational systems. All right, so let's go back to my slides. How am I doing? Oh yeah. So here is the prompt that generated it, and I will put in the show notes the prompt. But essentially, I did it by saying, you are the world's best business analyst and operations researcher and software architect. And then Gene Kim, who wrote the Phoenix Project and DevOps Handbook and more, and Steve Spear, who wrote the High Velocity Edge and Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System, wrote a new book together. And the reason I put that information in there is that I'm hoping, with the hope was to activate kind of any knowledge it knew about both Steve and me. And then I described the 3 mechanisms, and the prompt was summarize in bullet point form how the mechanisms of S, S, and A appear in the given case studies. Try to give 3 examples of each mechanism as sub-bullets. If the answer is not in text, just say, I don't know. All right, that's 25, maybe 30 minutes. Why don't we wrap it up for now? I hope that was useful. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about the other metaphor that we cover in the book, which is about moving a couch. All right, see you next time.